Okay, fantastic. Well, welcome back to our book club. We're happy to welcome Trevor MacKenzie. This is our fifth and final book club Zoom series, where we are going to have an open Q&A for everything inquiry, teaching and learning, learner engagement, and the inquiry process. So welcome and thank you for being here. We have gone through the book and through Misty Patterson's book club roles, thought about ways to engage in reading books and discussing books differently. So her pop-up studio is something that we've used in this book club, and it's worked very well. So we're excited to continue our book clubs in that same way and welcome our next book club in our next meeting. But for this, our fifth series for Dive into Inquiry, we're happy to welcome Trevor MacKenzie, and also just think about what are our biggest takeaways, what are our biggest insights from our time together, and then some of those enduring questions that we have that hopefully we can discuss as a team. So just thinking about, what are those biggest aha moments or some moments that have pushed your thinking forward the most that we can share with our group throughout all of our 5 weeks together.
Thank you, Michael. I'm excited. Yeah, friends, if you have any questions or what stood out to you as pieces that really resonated with you, it's always nice to connect with teachers and be able to explore the thinking and the learning. So if you have a question, please fire away.
My aha moment was like when we were doing the 4 pillars of inquiry, that can be stretched to the inclusion classroom or a differentiation classroom, and how well it works using the 4 pillars of inquiry, how we can help the special learning difficulty, children with special learning difficulties. That I understood in this entire book club. That's my aha moment. One
Michael,
driving
I'm
question.
unfamiliar with the Misty Patterson format, so forgive me. Do I respond or do I just stay patient? Do we do a roundtable? I should have asked that right away, Michael, so forgive me.
Oh, that's no problem. The Misty Patterson pop-up studio was a way for us to discuss specific chapters of your books. We each took on different roles in the book club and then shared out within our role. So in this week, we are actually deviating from our standard book club and just having a round table. So please chime in anytime you'd like, offer insights anytime you'd like. Anybody who would like to offer a question or offer an insight and advance our conversation, this is really just an open forum for discussion.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah.
And forgive me, Vijay, for interrupting you there. I know you were continuing, so I certainly apologize.
No problem. Actually, my driving question was, whenever we think about free inquiry, I have this block. I think I cannot implement in the lower primary or the early years classroom. Do you have any suggestions for it? Because you have been guiding a lot of schools in that. So I personally want to know whether we can implement the free inquiry in the lower primary classes.
Yes, the answer is yes. And what's really interesting is I've seen some amazing things done at the primary level when we're more playful with our understanding of time and inquiry. I think a misconception is that inquiry has to be the stretched out project or the stretch out learning experience. And I've seen, in fact, kindergarten students, 5 years old, go through an entire cycle of inquiry in 15 minutes. They tune into a curiosity and the teacher engages in a questioning protocol or questioning exercise, and they find some pathways to go explore these questions. They dialogue, they confer, they discuss, they capture some evidence, and before you know it, what does a 5-year-old do? They're interested in something else. They're turning into something else. And so I think sometimes our greatest constraint to inquiry-based learning and teaching from an inquiry stance is our conception of time, how much time we have to spend in learning. And so I encourage teachers to be playful with the inquiry cycle being something that isn't tied to a set amount of time, and I think in that, at the primary years, it frees us up tremendously. And primary teachers are so lucky. I think high school teachers have it so difficult because they're so constrained by our timetable and by our schedule and by how we silo subject areas. Whereas primary teachers and elementary school teachers, they have their students for a longer duration of time in the day. They can do inquiry cycles that encompass different curricular objectives and interests and curiosities from our students. So I actually find it's more freeing and liberating to do free inquiry with our littlest students. I find sometimes it's the opposite. It's the high school teachers. I really have a harder time engaging them in what that type of student agency looks like and sounds like and feels like in their setting. But yes, primary kids are fully ready for exploring their curiosities. I think sometimes it's us that limit it.
If I can,
yes, Mike, you can.
I'm sorry. If I can extend that idea of starting with our youngest learners, and then thinking about how our oldest learners may have a tougher time going through these cycles. At University of School, we have academic research programs starting in the 9th grade, where it is really an inquiry-driven, passion-based program where you choose one topic and explore it through your upper school time, and then have some, authentic process that you share at the end, or product that you share at the end. So we're thinking about what are those strands that we can pull from our youngest learners, because our inquiry into passion projects don't start in the 9th grade, right? So what are those strands, what are those threads that you see that teachers can implement in all, divisions of schools, starting with our, pre-K 3 youngest learners all the way up through our seniors? What do you find is, the most important skill or the most important part of inquiry that can be developed within an entire community?
Yeah, well, there are a few, Michael, and that's such a rich question. That is the journey of implementing inquiry-based learning across an organization, right? From the younger years to the middle years to the older years. And so with my work with schools, we map out skills, we map out competencies, we map out inquiry assets, inquiry muscles, as Kath Murdoch calls them. And we map those out vertically across a grade level horizontally across a grade level, and then vertically across the school. So when you identify kind of the portrait of a learner, or what you want your students to strengthen in terms of those skills, you can begin to tease them out. What does it look like to be a critical thinker in the year 1, the year 2, the year 3, etc. So that's a big piece, Michael, is mapping out those critical skills. Sometimes those skills are tied to our curriculum, which is quite, regional, localized. Sometimes it's greater than that. We think globally, what are some global understandings or competencies we want our students to sharpen or hone or flex? So that's one piece, is identifying those skills, Michael. Undeniably, one of those skills that is an underpinning of inquiry is questioning. And I say questioning not just because it allows students to ask more sophisticated questions, which takes us to a more agency-rich experience, but also because in asking questions together, we begin to partner with one another. So this is a fascinating one. Questions as an underpinning to inquiry, but then it changes the dynamic in the class where we begin to collaborate and co-construct and co-design, which is really important in an inquiry. It's not the teacher, of course, telling the student, it's how do we engage in a partnership and learning where we're working together. So questioning is an underpinning, and in that questioning, we begin to reimagine the landscape of which teaching and learning occurs. Thinking routines are a part of my repertoire, right? Like I've got my library here. I'll pull out Ron Richard and Mark Church's work, right? We've got this one, and we've got this one. But those are significant in terms of mapping out those skills, mapping out what is the type of thinking we hope we elicit in teaching and learning, and then how do we use that as evidence to guide our next steps, which goes back to there's a partnership dynamic that we are really trying to foster and cultivate in our learners' experience, which takes us back to questioning. But I think that's a key component, Michael, is the skills that we're trying to cultivate, the skills that we're trying to sharpen, questioning, and then of course a partnership in learning. Mm-hmm. Just throwing thoughts out there, and I'd love to hear people's your context. What are the skills that you are nurturing with your students, and are they different than mine? And how do you engage in questioning with your students to create a learning partnership What does it mean to partner with students in your context? How do you do that? How do you co-design and co-construct? I'd love any thoughts, any opinions, any sharing, or just even any further questions. But that was a powerful one, Michael. And then again, it allows us to horizontally map it out and then vertically map it out, because then we're really impacting long-term the learner's journey across schooling. It's not just inquiry happens in one pocket over here, over here, over here. The school is actually aligned in our beliefs and our values of supporting students as inquirers. So that's really helpful. Once we map out those things, we can map it out with our vertical and our horizontal as well.
Good morning and good evening, everyone. So Trevor, yes, for your question, I've been experiencing that for amazingly, onto the first pillar, the prior knowledge, try and connect more with the personal connection. So prior knowledge may be kind of a personal connection from what they've experienced, maybe we can then bring in a lot of connection between the community, between the family. A kind of a prior knowledge question has always helped me a great time. If my prior knowledge is going to be really great, but the question is going to be good, and if I'm going to get a wow, an aha moment in the class, I always feel that inquiry was more of a amazing win-win situation. So it has led a way to a lot of pre-inquiry also, then where peers connect of similar interest, and then they start taking various perspectives. And that has always been a great way of starting an inquiry. And also to end, so they come and work on their prior knowledge again to see how well it has helped them to reflect back, has helped them throughout the process to gain a new knowledge. So it's something I always believe in. And if that pillar is always made strong, the entire journey then falls in place. Through my experience is what I wanted to share here.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, what's interesting in hearing you share, I thought a lot about provocation. I thought a lot of how we elicit connection making and meaning making. And you reference a question is really helpful. We ask them a compelling question to get them reflecting and making connections to something they've experienced at home or in their life, or maybe something they've read or seen in other spaces. And I find a provocation allows students to make connections that perhaps we would have overlooked without the richness of an image, or the richness of an experience, or the richness of a text, or the richness of a video. And so I'm always mindful of the provocation I'm bringing in. I'm always quite intentional of how the provocation is meant to scratch at more of the prior knowledge that we know is so important. And I sometimes am so in wonder of the connections my students make. And I find the provocation can be the launch point to the connections they make. And so I always encourage teachers, spend time designing and curating rich provocation, not just to spark curiosity in your students, but to do just what you're referring to, access more prior knowledge. You know, a provocation, students can make connections that they didn't anticipate they were going to make until they see the provocation. It elicits some deeper thinking, some diverse reflection, some connections to spaces that perhaps they had forgotten about or hadn't thought about in that way until they saw the provocation. Then they, oh, that makes me think of that. Or I once saw something in a museum that makes me think of that. Or my father told me a story once when I was a child and it makes me think of that. So the provocation allows a whole bunch of different entry points. I think you've referenced one provocation, which is the type of question we ask students. I encourage us to have an array of provocation. Like I know some of you have heard me speak to this before, but I'd love to do a four corners provocation exercise where at one corner of the class, there's one provocation. Maybe it's a compelling question, and I attach a thinking routine to the provocation to gather some evidence so they make their thinking visible. And then at the other corner, maybe I have an image. So there's a question in that corner, an image over here, a video over here, maybe over here there's a website that they go visit on a Chromebook or a device. And they're all tied to the same concept. They all have the same, central focal point of the curiosity or of the learning journey that particular day. And again, think of the rich connections our students make when there's almost a richer, diverse array of provocation. Rather than just focusing on the website, I've got your rich question, I've got that rich image. So again, driving it home, forgive me for being a little redundant, but curating powerful provocation is such a skill in the inquiry classroom. And it's one that's often overlooked as being like, oh, the curiosity thing doesn't matter. The curiosity thing is so critical. And you've obviously surfaced that for my thinking today in sharing the use of a powerful question to access prior knowledge. So thank you for that.
So Trevor,
Yeah, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
And when we work on this provocation, because Vidya is also my colleague, so we take it to different facilitators to ask, beyond grade levels, to check on a collaboration meetings, to check, do you think this would work out for my classroom? I'm going to work on this particular theme or whatever, is this going to help? Is this question open-ended? Or do you think we're going to get only one restricted? So we work, and we used to have a lot of fun time doing that when we take that question, working with our own team, and making it more nurturing, and then taking it always to the children who's helped us through the journey, which I wanted to add again. So cannot be one teacher's thought there again, or facilitators thought again. The whole team collaborating has always helped.
Yeah, I see a lot of the schools I support, we have teams of teachers who come together, and in their planning, they're actually designing provocation. They're looking at the curriculum and they're considering where do I want to spark curiosity? And then they're curating provocation that they can all access, because they're all a part of a team that's teaching towards the same curriculum. And now our lens is, how do we spark curiosity in those curricular spaces? How do we cultivate curiosity? Curiosity isn't something that accidentally happens in the class. It's something we can be really intentional with and leverage more often. Michael, you were going to share a question or an insight there.
Yes, what I was thinking was, this group of teachers have been so generous in sharing of ideas and resources and things like that. And I know that you had a series of Instagram posts that were inspiring provocations, interesting images and things like that. So I wonder, what advice can you give for teachers who are looking for some of those rich images or those interesting videos or the websites? Where can we find those? What networks where do you find them? How can we grow that idea of curating a robust surplus of images and questions and videos and things like that?
That is such a great question. And you can see I'm kind of doing a bit of a dance here to find a couple things. So here's one thing I'm going to throw in the chat for you all. And this was created with a good friend, a colleague out of Saudi Arabia, Andy Vasali. Some of you may be familiar with Andy's body of work. And Andy and I have had a number of conversations. He has a great podcast. And Andy and I were talking about when a provocation falls short. And how can we ensure our colleagues don't have that happen? Because you come into a lesson with the best intent, and if you don't spark curiosity, it really does. It's a mess. And so Andy and I collaborated on this little provocation design tool for teachers to consider. What is a strong provocation, Michael? How do I know before I've launched it with a student that it's more likely to create the curiosity I'm hoping for it to elicit? And so I wanted to give that all to you, because it's not something that I've published. It's not even something that's on my website. I usually just give this out to schools that I support to have teachers reflect on, is this a powerful provocation? A couple of things we want is, we want a provocation to have great shelf life. We want it to have a long span of time to it, so that as learning occurs, we can revisit the provocation and use it as a prompt to see how their thinking has changed. We could launch a unit of inquiry or learning experience with a provocation, and then after a week or 2 weeks, let's revisit the same provocation and see how their language has changed, see how their questions have changed, see how the research or the resources or the information that they've acquired has now changed how they interact with the provocation and the connections they make. I even encourage some teachers to use the provocation as their summative assessment. Wouldn't that be neat to compare your summative provocation reflection with your initial, the very first day of that inquiry? So this resource helps a little bit with that. There are some categories, some columns, there are some rows, that I think prompt teachers to reflect on. Authenticity, for example. This is what sparked Andy and I's conversation. He was talking about a teacher who launched an earthquake simulation in Saudi Arabia, where he played this like violent sounding, like the classroom was meant to be shaking. And all the kids get under the desks, count to 30. And all the kids kind of looked at the teacher like, you're crazy. Like there's just music playing off the computer over there. And because they don't have earthquakes in Saudi Arabia, like we would in West Coast Canada, or what, like we did on the Rim of Fire, right? We know earthquakes, and they didn't there. And so there is this lack of authenticity. And kids can smell that from a mile away. And so how do we ensure students' curiosity is genuine and authentic? The provocation has to be such. So that's one piece I wanted to share with you all. And then the second piece is, it definitely takes me time, Michael, to curate provocation. Like I haven't found one website where I'm like, wow, it's got everything. Wonderopolis is really a neat site. National Geographic is a great site. There are a few Instagram accounts that are science teachers or history teachers that share some compelling content, but there's never just one. I always find that as I'm a learner, I just curate really interesting things. And I think that's the hallmark of successful provocation hunting, is I'm just really curious too. And when I see something, when I find something, I want to share it out to the masses. There are a couple websites, but there's not just one. Another website I absolutely love, and I'll throw it in the chat here. It's called Unsplash. Unsplash.com.
Yes.
And Unsplash is just a fantastic image database that just has really high res quality images, and you can search based on a concept. So maybe you search sustainability, and then you can find those rich images there. And then I'll share one more resource with you, Michael, just because you got me going here, and this is just such a fun conversation. Am I able to share my screen with you all?
You should be.
Yeah, so why don't I do that right now? And I'll see if this works. So forgive me. Thanks for playing along, friends. This is fun. So there, this is great. I'll throw this in the chat with you as well. And you can absolutely use this as much as you see fit, but this is a provocation mat, essentially. So there's one here for upper elementary and high school teachers, and then there's one here for kindergarten, lower elementary teachers. And this is an inquiry into sustainability and the UN global goals. And some of you are familiar with those, like what a rich opportunity for students to explore something meaningful and relevant. And so I frame this inquiry with, we're all going to explore this concept, but you're going to choose a goal of your own that you feel you're most interested in, you're most curious about, you want to explore more meaningfully, given my support. And it's a provocation mat in that embedded in each of the goals is a provocation. And so we will watch a few of these together. We will watch maybe 3 or 4 together. And with a rich thinking routine, right, Michael, to elicit, to get the thinking visible, to get the evidence, to document it so I can leverage it later. We'll watch a few together, but then I give them time and space. And I say, explore one until you've landed on one that you absolutely love. And then I facilitate a deeper dive into research. I teach some research skill. Students come out of that research with evidence that they have to share to a public audience. My year 10 students just recently created a series of infographics. Here, let's see if I could show you these rich infographics using Canva, which is free, right? We all know Canva. Let me just dance around here. Is this okay, Michael? Are we having fun?
So much fun.
Okay, good.
Oh,
You're seeing all the things. Now you're seeing my Google Classroom. Oh, this is so much fun. So let me go to my English 10 students. And here's their infographic that they recently turned in. Oh, look at those stats, 24 kids, and they all turned them in. Wow, those are good stats. But look at some of these rich infographics. These are so much fun. Hold on 2 seconds here as it loads up. This is Harrison's. And so they use Canva. They chose a goal of their own. They did this deep dive into research, and then they've produced these infographics. And believe it or not, I printed them all off. And so we actually hung them in our school, and we've encouraged other teachers to go interact with them, give us feedback, share what they learned, share what resonated with them. So going back to the UN global goals, this is really neat. So just to be clear, you may not like my videos. Like Michael may look at this and be like, Trevor, that's a great video for British Columbia, Canada, but I want to put my own video in there from Michigan. And you can, whatever your local context is, you could just simply click on the link after you've made a copy and go up here and edit out my link for your link. So it's really easy for you to make this contextually relevant for your students, which I think is important. I've chosen these because I think they're really curious, but what I think is curious doesn't matter. It's what's going to hook your students. So I wanted to share a lot of that because I wanted you to see how I give voice and choice in provocation, how I curate and mindful with the provocation that I'm using, and then where we could go with it next, how my students have some choice or some showing their learning to a public audience. Do I have any questions about anything I've just shared with you? I know that was a deep dive, so forgive me. Any questions?
So I don't have a question, but I have an experience to share, which is so in sync. So this is yesterday. My daughter is 4.5, and what Vidya was talking about, free inquiry with kindergarten. Although the school doesn't do a formal inquiry, but yesterday what happened in the class was such a beautiful moment that I wish to share. So they were doing about the pangolins. The teacher was talking. They have a circle time, so they were doing stories, and this was an online, a hybrid mode happening. And they did the pangolin story. So while they were doing the pangolin story, the teacher told them about the pangolins. They discussed how the pangolin looks like, and then they told about the tongue of the pangolin, which is as long as the size of the pangolin, and how it helps to eat ants. So there were two very interesting things which the teacher said. So the teacher asked, and then the class took it forward. So the first thing was, as the teacher was talking about the pangolins and saying, it loves to eat ants and it can go in deep into the anthill. So one girl very sweetly said, I think I need to get a pangolin for my grandmother. She's got a lot of ants in her house. Oh, that was like so sweet, so that was like, and the teacher then started encouraging. So what would you do with a pangolin? What would you do with a pangolin? So each child had a very different way of exploring and sharing what they wanted to say. And then there was this question which blew, I was surprised. I was working here and my daughter asked the question. I was like, what was this? So the teacher said, on 19th of February, we celebrated the Pangolin Day. And this, touch of a person doesn't think much about before asking, so what does the pangolin do on the Pangolin Day? And, the teacher was like, okay, that was a fantastic question. It's not what the pangolin does, but what we can do for the pangolin. And I could see my daughter's face, that's not correct. On a happy birthday, we do something. So what is the pangolin doing on the Pangolin Day? And so the richness of the questions, as you were correctly saying, is just not only the questions that provocate, but what you show a story which started about, the child and the mother's feelings. But Pangi the Pangolin is a beautiful story, culminated into something where, yesterday, the whole day, everybody in our house got to know what a pangolin is all about, the scales and how they're so soft. Everybody got a different version of it. But that kind of a conversation really helps. So as Vidya was asking about, can this be an inquiry possibility in the classroom? Probably had the teacher structured it a bit more, it would have had more rich dividends. But because it was a loosely structured exercise and there was a lot of opportunities to discuss, I thought they did manage to provocate and get them to think beyond what generally kids are used to thinking.
Yeah,
so yes,
there's such beautiful, thank you for that story and for that sharing. There's such beautiful artistry in how we continue to question students. There's such art in that. And I encourage all of us to like embrace the questions we ask students and just unfold and see where it takes us. As you've illustrated in your sharing, I think one really neat thing to do would be to document those questions that those students were asking, like the Post-it note. I want all those students' questions so I could have those visible up somewhere, a question wall or a wonder wall, and then I'm going to use them. Then I'm going to prepare some learning around those questions that those students had and those curiosities. And at the very least, as I'm exploring these ideas, I could just make rich connections to the questions they had. And now I've documented them so I can model how the connections could be made. So it's so important. Two pieces there is, what are the questions we ask our students to continue to let the learning unfold? There's artistry there. We need to demystify that for our colleagues. What are some questions we can have at the ready to continue to spark that learning experience? And then make the questions and the learning visible. and then we can leverage those in some possible way. A dear friend of mine, Jessica Vance, and I know some of you are familiar with Jessica's work. She's created these beautiful, simple, I don't know if you have a staff badge. I know some of you have seen me refer to this. This is my staff badge at my school on my keys. And she's created these beautiful question badges that you just print off and you glue it or tape it to the back of your staff badge. And they're just questions that I constantly go back to. What do you think? What makes you say that? Can you tell me more about that? What else does that make you think of? What does that make you wonder? I'm curious, can you share more of your thinking about? And I'm a seasoned inquiry teacher, and I look at this all the time.
Yes.
And why? Because there's incredible artistry in how we interact with questions with our students. And I think you've illustrated that so beautifully in your sharing. And I encourage you, you can go to Jessica's site and download that for free. And it's just such a great school-wide tool. You know, any teacher who's struggling with how to engage our students in this artistry of questioning, you can print that off and give it to them as a little bit of a gift. Really, really easygoing.
Yes, that's like brilliant.
You know, that makes me think of, you know, you were talking about visible thinking routines and making the questions a part of, you know, a daily occurrence, right? This isn't something that you do once in a while. This isn't something you do on a thinking Thursday or, you know, however you want to try to label that. But we've, you know, I'm teaching an upper school class for the first time in a couple of years. And we have now, this is our, I think our 6th or 7th class together. And we have started each class with an insights and questions routine where we have a new reading or a new learning coming up, and we will start with insights and questions from the learning or from the reading that will help drive our conversation or our time together for that class period. And the first time we did it, it was new. It was, you know, kids were apprehensive about it. They didn't know exactly what to do. And only a few shared. We have a whiteboards on each side of our classroom. One is insights, one is questions, and we contribute to those. This is now our 6th or 7th. So today we had one that was insights and questions. And I think learners finally understood what we were asking to contribute and how it helped guide our class discussion, because they would write their insights and questions on, and today I would say 90% of kids at least put one insight and one question up. And we use those as a way to guide conversation and unpack the material together. So as things arise, somebody will say, oh, that was a great question that we just answered. Or, oh, we've talked about that, let's remember. And taking those insights and taking those questions with us. And some we've left enduring, right? We didn't answer those questions and we saved those. And it has really helped with understanding that we all should be coming to a new learning experience with two things. One, like Trevor mentioned, connecting to prior knowledge, right? And Ramya, you had that beautiful story of connecting to prior knowledge, which then helps advance the inquiry. The other is you should be coming to a new learning experience curious. What are those things that you want to know more about? And that has helped shape the culture of that particular class in ways that we didn't think possible, right? In such a short amount of time, I think we have really developed a way that the learning and especially the curiosity and the inquiry has been learner-centered. Right? Yeah. We bring some questions to class, but most of the questions have been generated by the learners. And that has driven our learning forward. So it's been a great way to use one of those visible thinking routines. Another one, you know, I'm sure we're familiar with it, is question sorts. Yeah. And so, you know, I've used question sorts with, you know, our youngest of learners, like in 1st grade, when we're developing our topics for our Ignite talks, all the way up to using them with our staff at school, thinking about what and how we want to maybe approach a larger systemic change. What are those driving questions? And just having an opportunity to sit with the question, and the end result is not an answer. We're not looking to answer that question, right? We're looking to sit with the question, to develop our curiosity and to develop a way to advance our thinking. And I think that, that's one thing that I've taken away from a lot of our conversations is that not every question needs an immediate answer. Some of those enduring questions, some of those longer ideas is what helps drive our thinking, what helps drive our classrooms forward.
Yeah, Michael, as you're sharing, two things surface. The first one is, as you reference this last piece of the question doesn't necessarily need to be answered. Of course, in the exploration of the question, what are students strengthening? A series of critical learning skills, right? It's not that the answer is the thing we assess. It's not that the answer even needs to be attained. It's in the process of exploring, asking, and being curious. All these other skills that we deeply value in education. We deeply value these students acquiring these skills. Those are being flexed and felt and experienced. I think that's a critical component of questioning. They grapple with those skills. I have a specific question for you, Michael. You referenced this group of students doing the insights and the questions, and you've done it 6 or 7 times now. Why do you think it didn't work out the first 2 times? Why do you think it took 6 or 7 goes until they kind of saw, oh, this is where we're going? How come it took 6 or 7 goes, if you don't mind me asking?
First, I think it was a new experience for learners, right? The first thing we did, even before we discussed anything, was ask them for their insights and questions. And I think that one thing that we value at University Liggett is that sense of curiosity and that sense of wonder, and that teachers are guides, and it's learner-centered and teacher-guided, right? But we find opportunities to question students to further their understanding. But I think this was one of the first experiences that learners had where their insights and their questions began the learning and helped advance the class. So I think the very first day, we shared this thinking routine that we were going to do, and we said this was going to be something that's going to become a weekly occurrence, or not a weekly, but twice or 3 times a week, an occurrence for our classroom. So I think that once learners understood what the expectation was, and that when there was only 1 or 2 questions on the board, that those 1 or 2 questions are the questions that we were going to use, that there wasn't a safety net or a what do you call the thing you throw off a boat and the people who are drowning catch it?
Yeah,
Yes, thank you. So there wasn't going to be anything that was thrown out by the teacher. And so as we progressed through this thinking routine, the agency grew, knowing that their engagement for that day was dependent on the insights and questions that came from the class. And of course, we asked questions along the way, but we used their questions as the anchor.
Yeah.
But now
absolutely.
that we've had this experience, and today I think was a pivotal moment too, if you don't mind me getting into some of the minutia of this, is that we talked about what makes a deep insight and what makes a great question, because we need to, like you said, flex those skills. And so we engaged in questions and insights. And before we went into starting to talk about, it was a material culture of the Model T class. It was all about the beginnings of Henry Ford and how he didn't become an overnight sensation. And a lot of people didn't believe in him and pulled their funding from his, from his beginnings. And he just had to make things happen. So before we got into that, I asked learners to read other people's questions and other people's insights and identify one that they think is rich and why they might think that. And it wasn't the content that they were thinking about, but it was the process of why do you think that this insight is one that's worthy of discussion? And, some of the learners said, well, I think a really great insight is something that would spark a really great conversation. So as you're reading and as you're looking closely and as you're thinking deeply, think about what you might be able to extract from that you think might start a really interesting conversation with friends. That might be a really great insight for you. What makes a great question, right? Thinking about some learners said, finding something very specific about what you're learning about. Others said, well, I think it's how do you connect that little thing to a broader idea? Others said, well, how do you take this broader idea and find the little things that are curious about it? So we had this conversation about the process and what strategies do you use to create questions? What strategies do you use to have these insights? And I think that was a moment for us where we're like, oh, I think it goes beyond the actual getting the question or getting the insight. Is how do you do that? So I'm really curious to see what next week is going to look and feel like, and how that is going to kind of help advance our time together.
Yeah. As I referred to learning muscles, I just have to reference Guy Claxton's work. That's really his language, and that's deeply impacted, obviously, that analogy. So learning muscles is definitely a Guy Claxton-ism, and he's a dear friend and someone who's shaped a lot of the language I use and my understanding of inquiry, so to speak. And then, I asked that question, Michael, because I had a feeling of what you would say, but also because I've really been engaged the last couple of years measuring the time teachers give that are new to inquiry to that process you just engaged in. Like, you gave it 6 or 7 times. The majority of teachers wouldn't have given it that duration of time. And maybe it's because you're a believer. Maybe it's because you've done it enough times that it's going to shift eventually. Maybe it's because you're very curious yourself and that curiosity is guiding more of your risk taking. But a lot of teachers, they're looking for it to work on the very first day. Okay, here's the thinking routine, questions, insights. Where's the magic? And they don't see the magic. And then they close that book and they're like, I'm not going to try that again. That fell flat. And that's just not the case at all. We need to share a couple of things here. One is we need to share stories like yours, Michael, right? This should be our individual responsibility, to share it didn't work the first time beautifully. It's iterative and it's all evidence that guides my practice. And then the second piece is we have to talk about how our students are used to being complacent learners. Like, Michael, you said it. They actually needed to see that their questions were going to shape the learning in order to kind of engage or buy in or whatever you want to say. They needed to know it was authentic. And what does that authenticity depend on? It depends on somewhat the teacher's commitment to the process and not closing the book up on the first day. Imagine if you had done that, Michael. That didn't work. I'm not doing that again. And then 2 weeks later, you tried it again. The kids aren't going to engage.
No.
So stories like this really, really matter. The duration of time we give things really, really matters. And I encourage us all to relinquish some of our hesitancies about giving time. Like, give more time. Take that risk of time and see what unfolds. Give it a little bit more time and see what the return on investment of that time could be. I always find that if I'm playful with time and I don't look at time as a constraint, I look at it as the gift, more things develop that I'm surprised by or I'm unexpected by. So I appreciate you sharing your vulnerability there, Michael, sincerely, because I don't think many teachers would have given it as much of an ongoing try as you did, right?
I think it's the idea of that initial investment, like you said, the idea of starting slow to go fast. Now that we've taken that time in the initial starting of the class, now the learners understand that, they play an integral role in the experience of the class, right? And so next time today we use the 3 whys routine. There wasn't as much, that was the first time that they've seen it, but there wasn't as much hesitation of like, okay, we're thinking about starting from an egocentric perspective and broadening our perspective as we think about a concept. Okay, I understand this better now. And they, that wasn't as much of a hesitancy because I think that, they saw my investment in the thinking and in their contributions. And then when I asked them to do something else, thinking about things a little bit differently, the time it took will get shorter and shorter and shorter, right? So, thinking, and one thing that I don't want to take up all the airtime, but thinking about in July again with our summer inquiry workshop, we're talking about the first 5 days of school. What is it that we can do in the first 5 days of school to set the tone of inquiry so that it will help guide the rest of the school year. So what kind of investments are you going to make in time, in modeling, and questioning, and these kinds of cultural forces that will help you create the groundwork for the rest of the school year? And I think that the investment of time is one of those that we can take a closer look at.
Hugely. Yeah, in those infographics I just showed you, I was handing them back. I printed them all off. And as I was handing them back, it was the first time I had them in my hands. I hadn't marked them yet. We were going to do a peer assessment, a self-assessment, and then a teacher assessment. So I was handing them back and I was calling out names. I'd say, Harrison, and Harrison would walk up and I'd give it to him. Wow. And then Julie, and Julie, wow. And Baker, wow. And every time I was handing one out, I was looking at it thinking, that's a B, that's an A, that's a B, that's an A. Every single infographic I handed out was high achieving, pretty darn high achieving. Wouldn't we all want that type of achievement in everything we do, B's or A's, right? So I asked the students afterwards, I said, I just had this really amazing experience where I was giving these back to you before we do the self-assessment, peer assessment. And I think these are all B's and A's. And I'm curious, what led to that level of success? What did we do together that led to that? Because I want to do that again. Like, can't we mirror that in everything we do together, that level of achievement and belonging and contentment and happiness? And they said 4 things. So what I did is I said, turn and talk in groups of 2 or 3. What allowed you to level up your achievement in this circumstance? And then kids, I said, okay, what do you have? Out of 2 or 3 minutes of turning and talking, they said 4 things. Number 1, they said, this is so cool. They said, we co-designed the success criteria, which that's co-designing is an inquiry underpinning. So we co-designed the success criteria. They told me what amazing infographics have. A part of that co-design success criteria was number 2. We looked at exemplars. We looked at what really strong things had going on, which allowed our co-designing to be really, really powerful. So far, co-design success criteria and exemplars. Number 3, they said the feedback I got from my peers was so helpful. I was always turning and showing and asking. And I said, well, sometimes feedback falls short. Like sometimes when I turn to a friend like Michael's such a good friend of mine. He doesn't want to give me critical feedback because we're such good pals. He doesn't want to hurt my feelings. And I said, well, what does feedback really depend on? And they said, trust. And I was like, yay. Like we have a culture of trust. Again, one of those investments we do in the first week of school, right, Michael? We invest in a culture of safety and trust. So far, co-designing success criteria, exemplars, and really powerful feedback. And then the fourth thing they said was time. They said time is the factor. They said, you gave us enough time. We didn't feel rushed. It wasn't something you sprung up on us. And so those 4 things now I have written on the board as like hallmarks of success. Like I need to do those 4 things. So now we're writing an essay. They're writing an essay about the UN Global Goals, right? They're doing it collaboratively. So, Michael research goal 16, Vidya research goal number 12, I research goal number 8. We come back together, we share our research, and now we're writing a 5-paragraph essay. So it's like collaborative essay writing to a certain degree. And now I need to do those 4 things. I need to find an exemplar. I need to give them an opportunity to co-design the success criteria, et cetera, et cetera. And then I've said, what happens if a teacher doesn't co-design the success criteria with you? And he gives you, or she gives you, or they give you the success criteria. Does that mean you can't succeed? And you know what my kids said? They said, it just means I have to tune in and be really aware of the criteria they're giving me because I know how much the criteria matters to my learning. I'm like, oh my God. What if your teacher doesn't assign feedback? Or what if you don't have a culture of safety and trust in that classroom? What do? I find someone else that I feel safe with or that I trust. I'm like, yay. So I'm hoping that this type of reflective conversation, reflective thinking will become kind of cross-contextual. Like they can take it to any setting and use these 4 hallmarks of success, so to speak. I think what's really interesting, Michael, that we're kind of unpacking is what is a really easy entry point for teachers? Like what can we give them that they can go and leverage or try and see early success with? I just referenced 4 things. 4 things that I would hope all teachers would do in their learning. That story, this just happened last week. This isn't like innovative. This doesn't just happen in my classroom. This happens in many classrooms around the world, but I think teachers who are new to this work need those entry points, like co-designing success criteria. You know what I'm going to hear? I'm going to hear, well, how do I do that? Okay, let's workshop that. Let's talk about that. Let me coach that. You go do that now. I just had a student come up to me yesterday, and you know what she said? This is another class that we co-designed success criteria on the infographic for. She said, can you look at this and tell me what you think? And I said, nope. I'm going to ask you to sit and reflect on the co-design success criteria. And then I'm going to ask you to turn to a friend and give them some feedback. Because then I'm empowering the room. Same thing that you're doing, Michael, empowering your students to write their questions and write their insights. I can't be the person doing the heavy lifting. I have to create the conditions for them to take it on themselves and for them to do it together. And I think that's been an underpinning of our conversation today. In fact, now that I think about it, is how do we create the conditions for that type of learning to occur so we are not leading the charge all the time? Yeah, I appreciate the hearts. I saw people saying, yay, that's great. So thank you for that, Lou, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, Curdy. It's good to see you, by the way. It's almost time for me, Michael. I had us slotted for a chunk of time, and you'll have to forgive me, but we have about 4 more minutes on my clock.
Well, I just want to say we just appreciate you so much taking the time to meet with us. Every time I'm with you, I learn something new or think about something that I had not considered before. I'm still reeling with the types of inquiry from the past summer workshop where you were talking about, I used to look at the types of inquiry as different ways that we engage our students throughout the day or throughout a unit. And then when you came in with talking about, no, this is about how much agency we give our students, I was like, oh my goodness, that totally changed the narrative in my brain. And then assessing myself of where am I, right? And same with this session, just always illuminate and help us to walk away with such goodies. So I just wanted to say thank you so much.
Thank you, Lou. I'm in awe of you all. You inspired me, and I see the work that you're doing. And forgive me if I don't have a chance to retweet it or give you a like or to connect personally. I'm in awe of all of you. And I'm just so thankful that you're engaged in the book club, but you do what you do with your students, and then you share out. You're such sharers. And I'm just really in awe of you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I know we're going to connect, whether it's in the Summer Institute, Michael, or at TIES or wherever. And so I just applaud you all, and I thank you. And yeah, open invitation to continue this conversation. Absolutely.
Trevor, thank you so much. We have really enjoyed using Dive into Inquiry as a springboard to all of our conversations so far. It's been a really helpful text for us to unpack the things that we are doing in our classrooms already, taking a deeper dive into those classrooms, happenings, and also thinking about things differently, which then help us come to our classroom each day with new insights and renewed energy. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Michael.
See you soon.
Okay, talk soon, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.